and thank you for tuning in to episode 6 of the Convention of States Michigan podcast. I am your host, Robin Riddell, and I am the State Communications Coordinator here in Michigan.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our Michigan Convention of States family. I'm Kelly Olford, co-hosting here with Robin at our Convention of States Michigan podcast. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to our guest as well for this afternoon.
I am excited to introduce our guest today. His name is John Poelstra. John is a district captain and lives in the Pinckney area, and John offers another perspective on why we need a convention of states. John, will you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how it influences who you are today?
All right. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Kelly. I think that I'm like most people who's focused on their careers and raising children all their life. But I began to notice some occurrences of events that reminded me of what my grandfather used to tell me in his stories about the Bolshevik Revolution and when the communists took over Russia. And these stories resonated with me for all of my life. And I was beginning to see the same events occurring here in the United States. My grandparents obviously immigrated to the United States. They had to escape from the communists, and they came here to a better nation, the greatest country in the history of the world. And so I'm proud, that they did that. They did that for their family, and they did that for me. And I hope that I can pass that down to my own children.
How long have you been involved with Convention of States then?
I've been involved for nearly 2 years now.
And when was it that your grandparents immigrated over from Russia?
They immigrated during the Depression in the early 30s. When they first escaped from communist Russia, they were in Germany. And they stayed in Germany for a little while, and they began to see the same things happening in Germany as what they saw in Russia. And so they immigrated to the United States as soon as they were able to.
Wow. It's a really interesting story, getting that kind of perspective from communist Russia, from what you saw in Germany, like all of those, they got a little bit of it all.
Yeah.
Yes, they did. They saw, well, with the communists, they promised a lot and delivered nothing but misery. They stole their land, their seeds, their cattle, their livestock, and left my grandfather's family destitute. So they all gathered together to leave and to immigrate back to. There's a German enclave that is in Russia that was known as the Volga Germans. And that was back 2 centuries ago during Catherine the Great. And these Germans never really intermarried or went out of their village. And so they more or less remained or kept their German heritage. So when the Bolsheviks took over, these Germans were persecuted. Many that could not escape ended up being sent to Siberia in the 40s under Stalin. But my grandparents were fortunate enough to make it to Germany.
That's an amazing story. Wow. And so you said you've been involved with Convention of States now for a couple of years. What types of things have you been doing with Convention of States here in Michigan?
Well, as a district captain, I try to organize the volunteers to do recruiting through block walking and also passing out card holders to businesses. I've also been involved with Telepatriot and making lots of phone calls, as well as hosting, holding, coordinating some town hall meetings as well to get the word out in my community.
Wow, that's great. You've done some writing as well, correct?
Well, I wanted to write some of my thoughts down about the opposition to a convention of states, because I find it, well, a little infuriating of their misinformation. So yes, I have written some of those things down to help me formulate my thoughts.
Very good. One of those, and one of the reasons we wanted to have you on here today is one of those thoughts that you've written down for us was, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, kind of mentioning things that our country needs some sort of a course correction, and that critics are warning against revising the Constitution that would put us on some sort of slippery slope, something, things along that nature. How is it that you are responding to that type of criticism?
Well, the course correction, of course, is constitutional amendments to help fix, what's wrong with this country currently, with, the overspending that it is, the overreach of the federal government. And so that's what I meant by course correction, was constitutional amendments. And in that, though, those who are opposed to the Convention of States often say that, opening up the Constitution will cause us to be on a slippery slope where our rights, our constitutionally protected rights, could be repealed. Now, there's a lot hinged on that word could. There's no factual foundation for what they're saying. There's no historical record that supports what they're saying. It's all speculation based on the word could. Now, my feeling or my thoughts on that was that if what they say is true, then it would have already happened. But since it hasn't happened, it won't happen with a convention of states, type of activity or progress. And let me expand on that.
Mm-hmm, please do.
The opposition's runaway convention is based on two false beliefs, predicated on two beliefs. The first belief is that the convention is an open forum where anything can be discussed or introduced. And that's how they get to a repeal of amendments. But that is obviously completely false. We've had many conventions, mostly, regional, that have stuck to the applications that they started off with, the topics that they have. And that is one of the requirements for the Convention of States, is that each state makes an application specific to term limits, limited spending, and limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. And those are the topics that must be constitutionally stuck to during a convention. Now, if what the opposition said were true, and it was an open forum for discussion, then obviously there would be no need at all for an application that had specific topics. You could just make an application that was basically blank, and that would be sufficient. And in fact, currently, we have what I count 44 states that have made an application to Congress for various topics. okay? Not on the same topic, but on various topics. But if the topics didn't matter, according to the opposition, well, then we could have a convention of states today. We could have had it yesterday or a year ago. We wouldn't have to wait, if, of course, what the opposition was saying was true, that it's an open forum. But it's not. You have to stay with the topics. And we're at 19 states right now, and we need to have 34 states that have the same language for their application. And that's what the convention will be limited to when it finally occurs. So that's on the first false belief. Okay. The second false belief that the runaway convention is predicated on is that there is a nefarious group of people who want to repeal our constitutional rights. Now, I will say that our constitutional rights are being subverted right now, which is what's concerning of me and why I joined Convention of States. But subversion is not the same thing as brazenly repealing a constitutional amendment. So if in fact there was this nefarious group, say, Soros or others that want to see a repeal, according to the opposition, that my argument is that, well, it would have already happened through the congressional pathway for amendments, because obviously the Congress is the easier pathway. All 20 Congress is much more with career politicians. They can be corrupted a lot easier than the 5,000 state legislators. And so there's no reason why this nefarious group would wait for years and years and years for a convention of states to occur. They would just work directly through Congress and get it done, and it would have already happened. So again, I go back to, if it could have happened, it would have already happened. But since it hasn't happened, it won't with a convention of states.
John, what would you most like to see happen at this convention of states? We have 3 issues to address. Is there one that you're most passionate about?
Well, the one I'm most passionate about is the third one, and it's the jurisdiction, the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. From what I see, that directly impacts the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal protection under the law. And what I see is that we have a two-tiered justice system. And I think that under controlling the power and jurisdiction of the federal government will help us to get back to equal protection under the law. Our Bible teaches us that we are all created in the image of God. Our Declaration of Independence says that we were all created equal. Our Pledge of Allegiance has the phrase liberty and justice for all. And so equal protection under the law, the 14th Amendment, to me resonates greatly in how our interaction with the federal government is.
And it's interesting too that even in corresponding with the 14th Amendment, how that kind of question of federal authority, especially over the states, also corresponds even with the 10th Amendment as well. And the state's sovereignty and state independence, and the kind of justice for states in general, kind of individual states, as opposed to even individual people with their relationship too with the federal government. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of I'll say our subversion of our rights, has come about by the Supreme Court interpretations of the Constitution. specifically on your point, the 10th Amendment, I mean, has almost been destroyed completely by the interpretations of the Supreme Court. But if we did have an amendment in there that perhaps was a little bit more concise, such as this 3/5 of the states can overrule any legislative or Supreme Court decision, then I think that would get back the checks and balances that we need to have with the states versus the federal government.
Yeah, checks and balances being the key word there for sure.
So I have a question actually for John or for Kelly, for either of you, a random question. We're here volunteering and we're trying to make this happen. And there are volunteers across America. We've got a great group here in Michigan. I find when I talk to my friends, they say, oh, well, I never heard about that. Oh, well, you know, I don't like to pay attention to that stuff. It upsets my life to turn a blind eye to all the crazy things that's going on. What do you say to people when you talk to them who didn't know, who don't seem to want to care?
I'll let you respond first, John.
All right. Well, you know, I try to point out that we're currently on a slippery slope of our constitutional rights being subverted. And even if you don't feel that, you know, it affects you, eventually it'll affect your children and their children and your legacy. And so you need to make a commitment to stopping this progress that, you know, of our rights being diminished in order to save your own children. So if not for yourself, then at least do it for your children.
Yeah, you said it right. Yep, absolutely. You can't waste time here with your head in the sand. You know, like this isn't the time for that. And freedom does not, and liberty is not something that just passively happens to you. It is something that you have to be vigilant about and you have to be responsible for, just like you are with everything else in your life. So, I mean, just like you wouldn't stick your head in the sand and just cross your fingers that the groceries just happen to show up and the laundry gets done and your mortgage gets paid every month. You are vigilant about those things. You take care of those things. It's also time to take care of your liberty. And it's time to take care of and it's how you also help take care of your family, just as what John was saying too.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely.
It is definitely a slippery slope. I see it. I've felt it for years. I see things happening around me that I don't like. I feel like my own personal liberties have been infringed upon. I see unequalness and unfairness and the runaway spending, if only for our grandchildren. When you look at the number that they're inheriting right now that they owe, what a disservice we're doing to them by spending ourselves into oblivion. Mm-hmm. Kelly, you mentioned groceries, mortgage. You wouldn't go buy groceries if you didn't have the money, but we can pass these big spending bills that nobody knows where they go. And then you find out lately that we're paying for a border wall in another country, but nothing here. And to me, those are the kinds of things that I think are out of control and that we, the people, have been forgotten along the way.
On that point, Robin, you know, the excessive spending and the debt that our children and grandchildren will have reduces their choices in the future. Yeah. It reduces the freedom of choice, and so it you know puts them into bondage is what it does.
Well, Kelly, do you have any more questions? You want to take a question or wrap it up here?
Yeah. I mean, if kind of just tying, putting a bow here on our conversation. I mean, if you are listening and you believe also that the country is probably headed in the wrong direction, if we are on that slippery slope and you have found yourself nodding your head in agreement with the stuff that John and Robin have been saying, please join us. I mean, we have volunteer opportunities and ways for you to get on board with our team, and the way that John has been on board with our team, all sorts of different positions. I mean, you heard some of the things he does as a district captain, and there's all sorts of different ways for you to get involved, even with Robin's team, to be able to do a lot of communication stuff and writing and social media stuff. Please join us. The first step in all of this is to make sure that you have the petition signed, because that does a couple of things. It gets you on our mailing list at a national level and here at a state level as well. And then it also actually sends a note to your specific state House rep and state senator that they have another constituent who is a supporter of Convention of States. So if once again, make sure you get that petition signed. You go to conventionofstates.com/event_petition, and you'll be able to find it, just right there, even on the main page there too. It's easy to find. If you find yourself having any questions throughout the week, if anything that you have heard has kind of piqued your interest or piqued any questions, please feel free to send them to us at askmi at cosaction.com, askmi at cosaction.com, or you can attend any of the events that we have coming up. John's probably got some coming up here too. I know we've got a couple over kind of towards the other side of the state with another one of our regional captains coming up in Frankenmuth, coming up in Clio. We've got town halls and kind of informational, interactive public forums for you to be able to come get your questions answered. Kind of you'll be able to enjoy, join us actually in person and be able to get involved that way.
Thanks, Kelly. All of our events are listed on the website. If you're watching this podcast months from now, there'll be a different set of events, but you'll find out where we are and what we're doing across the state. John, I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing with us your viewpoint. We've participated in meetings together, and I knew that you brought a fresh perspective. Before I wrap up, is there any last words you'd like to say?
Well, not really, just that I have met a lot of people, like-minded patriots, through the Convention of States. And even though this is not a social organization, it does satisfy that element.
Absolutely. In fact, we just met in person for the first time. All three of us, actually, just a few weeks ago. We're so used to Zooming. Well, John, thanks so much for taking the time today. I want to wrap by reminding you that the founders were brilliant men when they drafted the Constitution in 1787. Based on the times that they had come out of, they could foresee a time when a government might ignore the will of the people. So they gave us a tool in Article 5 of the Constitution that will allow us to hold Washington accountable. Now, it took over 200 years for us to finally look at that and take some action on it, but here we are. Today, we are more than $31 trillion in debt, and we have an executive branch that employs 4.5 million people. 4.5 million people. That is what I call bloated. It's up to each and every one of us to take a stand, to join together and send a message to DC that we will no longer tolerate runaway spending and a bloated bureaucracy. We do have a variety of roles for volunteer. Whatever your special skill set is, we could use you. Technology, data analysts, being a district captain, being on the communications team, a social media warrior, maybe coordinating events for us. And guess what? You can do that right in your own community. Sure, we meet together on Zoom, but when it's time to go to work, we pack up and we go out and meet with people. And we would love to have you join us. So as Kelly said, please sign that petition, at least go that far. And if you have a little bit of time every month, consider becoming a volunteer. You'll hang out with some like-minded people. We get you trained so you're not on your own. You don't have to figure things out for yourself. We have it all, and we would love to have you join us. Please spread the word, share this podcast, and in the meantime, stay with the fight.